everyone, my name is Keely. Welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. Today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of January. I had a fantastic reading month, one of the best reading months of my life, honestly. My average rating was 4.19 stars, which is already higher than any month of 2022. So a great start. So we're going to start with stats. Now, if you are not interested in stats, I will put a little timestamp so you can go ahead and skip that. But I'm a stats girly. I love it. And I am using a spreadsheet that Daijah from Daijah's Book World created. So I will leave her channel down below. I love the spreadsheet. So I will put screenshots in here so you can see as we talk through it. So I read a total of 17 books, and actually 6 of those were rereads. I was having kind of a crisis and really wanted to revisit some of my old favorites, so I can't wait to talk about those. But as far as pages read, I read 6,317 pages. My most read genre was dystopian. I read 7 dystopians. Like I said, I was revisiting some favorites, and dystopian is one of my favorite genres of all time, so I'm so happy that dystopian came out on top this month. As far as format goes, I listened to 4 audiobooks, I read 6 ebooks, and I read 7 physical books. Now, the only time I'm able to listen to audiobooks is if it is a reread for me. I'm not able to listen to audiobooks if it's a first time read for me. I just can't focus on the story. But because I had a lot of rereads this month, I listened to 4 audiobooks, and I actually listen to them while I'm running. I'm a distance runner, and so I spend several hours a week running, and so that is a perfect way for me to reread old favorites. As far as ratings go, I had 0 1 star, I had a 1 2 star, 4 3 stars, 3 4 stars, and 9 5 stars. Can you believe it? 9 5 stars! And as for the type of book, I read 14 novels, I read 2 novellas, 1 anthology, and I read 2 arcs, which is really good because I'm really bad about reading arcs. And the last stat is author status. I read 2 new-to-me authors and 15 authors that I had read from before. So now we're going to go ahead and get on into the books, and these first 3 books I have to talk about, I filmed a vlog for, and that was one of my episodes of TBR Takedown where I read short books. And the first book I read for that was Layla and the Blue Fox by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. Now this is a middle grade book, it is beautiful, and I had read a book from this author before, and it was one of my favorites of last year, so I could not wait to get to this one, and was very excited to start out the year reading this one. So this follows a little girl named Layla, and Layla lives in London, and she is actually a Syrian refugee, and she actually lives with her aunt and her cousin in London, and her mom left her to go to a new country to find a job. So Layla is really struggling with why her mom left her for a job and why she's not good enough for that, and as she's growing up, she's actually realizing there was a lot of trauma associated with fleeing her war-torn country. But in this story, Layla finally goes to Norway to visit her mom, and her mom is completely obsessed with studying this Arctic fox. Now in the story, this Arctic fox is named Miso, and Miso is actually based on a true story of a fox that walked from Europe all the way to Canada. And so throughout the story, we get glimpses of the fox's point of view as they are traveling, trying to find a safe place to live, just as Layla and her family did. So this story ultimately is about grief and loss, but also hope and just finding a safe place to live and love your family and be together. So let me read a little bit of the author's note for you because it just kind of wraps up this whole story. And it says, but just like Layla finds out in the book, many more of us need to raise our voices and fight for people's right to live where they choose. Being born in a peaceful country is only a matter of luck. No one is better than anyone else because of where they are born. I just thought this was, once again, so beautiful. And the way that this is made is just so stunning. Like, look at that. And in some of the pages, there are page overlays that just change the whole dynamic of the story. This was a great one to start out with, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book is my first dystopian of the list, and that is The Maze Cutter by James Dashner. This is book 1 in his new series, which is also set in the same world as the Maze Runner series. So this is actually set 73 years after the events of the Death Cure. And we follow several different characters in the story. One of the ones we follow is named Isaac. Now Isaac is an islander, and the islanders are descendants of the original characters from the Maze Runner series. We also follow a woman named Alexandra, and in this world, cranks from the original series have developed intelligence, and they are now kind of a different form, and we didn't really get to explore that much, but I believe Alexandra is one of those people. And then we follow another character called the Orphan. And the Orphan has no family, that's why they're called the Orphans, and these orphans are in charge of protecting the Remnant Nation, which once again, we didn't get a whole lot of information about that. Now, I really enjoyed following the Islanders. Old Man Frypan is also in this, and Frypan is a character from the original series, and we also get glimpses of Newt's journal during the original series, and Newt is one of my favorite fictional characters ever, so to get to hear his words was just like a gift that I really was looking forward to. But like I said, there was a lot of information in this that was introduced, but nothing was explored, so I was pretty confused the whole time, but I am interested to see where it goes. I'm not mad about it, I just feel like it was kind of pointless, so I gave it 2 stars. The next book, I Was Wrong, is not actually in my TBR takedown video. This was in between those books because I was listening to it as an audiobook. This is a reread for me, and that is Anna Dressed in Blood by Kendara Blake. So in this story, we follow a teenager named Cass, and he is a ghost hunter. He learned from his dad, and they go and travel across America and hunt ghosts and take them down. So Cass is moving into this new town because he recently got a tip, and the note is written in blood, and all it says is Anna. So he moves to this town in Canada because he needs to take down Anna because this ghost has killed dozens and dozens of people. So this is kind of his story of trying to take down Anna, finding out who Anna really was and her story, and how she might not actually be the villain in this story. I loved this one, and I was worried because I read this in 2016 and I really think it held up. I still enjoyed it just as much. Now, Cass is not my favorite character to follow, but I feel like the character development we see is really interesting, so I'm really excited to see how he develops even more in the sequel. This is only a duology, so it'll be fun to wrap it up. This is also very similar to the TV show Supernatural, which I really love, and I thought it was funny because Cass is in this, and Cass is also in the TV show, so it's really nice, and there's also like a special knife involved. If you've seen the show, you know. But I did really enjoy this, and it also is like kind of aged up from young adult, and because it has a lot of language in it, and it's also very violent and gruesome, which I really liked that it read a little bit older. But I give this one 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed my reread. Now, this next book was actually the last book I read in TBR Takedown, and that is Find Me by Anne Fraser. Now, this is book 1 in, right now it's a duology, and this is like a detective series. So in this story, there is a convicted serial killer named Benjamin Fisher, and 30 years ago he was arrested, and he actually used his 5-year-old daughter to lure women in and kill them. Now, 30 years later, he has finally contacted the FBI and said he is ready to tell them where the graves of his victims are because nobody knows where they are. But his only condition is that Rennie Fisher, his estranged daughter, has to come along. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of trauma associated with that, and the murders are also gruesome, especially knowing that he used his daughter to lure them. But this was so fascinating. Now, if you don't like detective point of views, you might not really like this, but I really love the detective point of view. Rennie also used to work for the FBI, and she no longer can because of her mental health, and so I like that mental health representation, but it's also interesting to follow someone that used to be in law enforcement and no longer is, so they really have nothing to lose. But also the officer that we follow along with Rennie, it's interesting to see that friendship start to form. I love this, and I thought it was gruesome and just so fast-paced. I gave it 5 stars. Originally, I wasn't sure how I was feeling about it because the writing seemed kind of cold to me, but the way that it was written matched up so well with the story that was told, and I just really loved it. The next book for me was another reread, but this one I read physically, and that is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I'm not going to go into a synopsis for this one because you should already know. If you don't, go pick it up right away. So this one I actually tabbed and annotated, and I made an entire video for this, a love letter to the Hunger Games. I will leave it linked down below. It's one of my favorite videos I filmed. I just had a great time reading this and revisiting these characters. I have read this series so many times I've lost count, but it still hits me just as hard every time, and it truly stands the test of time and is one of my favorites forever. Of course, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Tell Me by Anne Fraser. This is the sequel to Find Me, and like I said, as soon as I read Find Me, I was really enraptured in the story, so I really had to pick up the second one, and it was on Kindle Unlimited, so it was just perfect. This one, there's not really a whole synopsis to it because it just follows the same detective on another case, and we also follow Rennie getting involved in that case and kind of getting out of her shell more often. I really love this one as well. It was so fast-paced once again, and I really want to read more more from Anne Fraser. I also gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna Maguire. Now this is book 8 in the Wayward Children series, and I was really looking forward to it because I just felt like it was going to be something special, and boy was it. So major trigger warning for grooming of a child. So this book actually follows a character named Nancy, and her stepfather is horrible and horrendous to her and is leaning towards the way of abuse. And so Nancy leaves and she goes into another world where the lost things go. And this world is so fascinating because the other doors to other worlds are connected to this world, so we get to see the lost world, but we also get to see so many different other doorways and worlds and meet other different characters. There's also kind of a dark mystery to this that Nancy has to figure out. I loved this so much. So I took pictures of the warning at the beginning and the author's note because it hit me so hard. So the dedication says, "For the child I was, I will spend my entire life trying to make up for the fact that when I was you, I didn't run soon enough. I'm sorry." Okay, and then the author's note says, "While all the Wayward Children books have dealt with heavy themes and childhood traumas, this one addresses an all too familiar monster, the one that lives in your own home. Themes of grooming and adult gaslighting are present in the early text. As a survivor of something very similar, I would not want to be surprised by these elements where I didn't expect them. I just want to offer you this assurance. Nancy runs. Before anything can actually happen, Nancy runs." It oh my gosh, it gets me every time, and that is all you need to know. And I'm so glad that warning is there at the beginning, but if you couldn't tell, I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. Be warned, it is the darkest in the series, but it is just so good, and Nancy is amazing. I love her. She's one of my favorite characters. The next book was another reread for me, and this was one of my audiobooks I listened to on my run, and that is Divergent by Veronica Roth. Now, the last time I read this series was probably 2013, at the height of its popularity, and I don't think I have read it since. So this, of course, is one of those classic YA dystopians. I don't think I really need to go into the synopsis, but we follow Triss and Four and the factions, and she is changing from the selfless abnegation faction to the hardcore, crazy Dauntless faction. Every time I was listening to this while running, I just felt like I was training for Dauntless, and honestly, I wasn't sure how I would feel about this once again because I hadn't read it in 10 years, and I love it. I'm obsessed. It is still so good. The factions in the world that Veronica Roth created is so intricate and amazing and just so detailed. The way her brain works, I was like, Veronica, you're amazing. I love you. Now, Triss is an interesting character because she is going through it. She's like, I am not selfless, but I'm also not that brave, but I'm also not that smart. You never know what she's gonna do. But I love that we get to see the training and the switch to factions and get more of the dystopian world and how it actually works. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars again. I am obsessed with this world once again. The next book I completed was Night Shift by Stephen King. I am reading his books in publication order, and this is the one that I read in January, and this is actually a collection of short stories. Now, first of all, look at this cover. That is incredible, and the cover actually ties into one of the short stories, which is really fun. I had a great time reading this, and honestly, a lot of the stories were really interesting. There's a story in here called The Boogeyman, and it's actually being made into a movie. The trailer just came out this week, and I am so excited because it is one of my favorite stories. Now, of course, there were stories in here that weren't as good, but there were so many in here that I want to see in a full-length novel so bad. They were so dark and gory and gruesome and nasty, some of them, and I had a great time overall, but my average rating did come out to 3 stars. The next book I read was The Visitor by Sergio Gomez, and this is actually a novella. I've read Sergio Gomez before, so I want to read everything he writes because I have loved his other books I've read. So this is actually an alien horror story, and it's also a snowy, isolated story. So we follow a group of characters who are stranded at a gas station, and aliens come and rip them to shreds, and that's basically it. So this one I didn't enjoy as much of as his full-length novels. It definitely was gory and gruesome, but I just don't know if I'm much of an alien girl, you know? It just really didn't get me going, and maybe it's because it was a novella and not a full-length novel, but overall I gave it 3 stars. Wasn't anything too special. The next book I read was How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This book released this month and I was very much anticipating it. So we follow a single mother named Louise, and when her parents suddenly die in a car crash, she has to fly home and try to get things settled, and along comes her despicable brother Mark. I hate Mark, he's a terrible character, but honestly, Louise isn't that great either. So as they are cleaning out this house and fighting over who gets what, they maybe start to realize that their mom's doll collection might be haunted. Yes, dolls. Her mom, or their mom, collected dolls, made dolls, did all this stuff with dolls, like hundreds and hundreds of them. And I just realized today that I knew somebody like that, and every time I would go into their house, it would just be very creepy. And so I can kind of imagine how this would seem. I will say though, it's not my favorite Grady Hendrix. That goes to the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That is on such a pedestal for me, and I just feel like all of his other books are kind of like the peasants of the kingdom, and Southern Book Club is just like the king, you know? And I don't know if anything will ever compare. It was creepy, but I just really hated the characters, and I really didn't like the sibling banter that went on. Actually, it wasn't even sibling banter, it was more like sibling hatred, and I just didn't like that. But yeah, it felt kind of slow at parts, but he really does go there, and it is kind of horrifying when you think of like haunted dolls. But yeah, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book was another reread for me, and that is an audiobook for me, and that is Insurgent by Veronica Roth, book 2 in the Divergent trilogy. I just love this series so much. So I will say though, I realized in this series, or in this book in particular, that Tris and Four are actually not very good for each other. Of course, when I read it when I was like 15, I was like, yeah, Tris and Four, like Four's the hottest guy ever, and he still is. But I don't think their relationship is that healthy or that strong. They bickered a lot in this one, and I feel like they were good to each other for development, but there comes a point where they just didn't need to be together anymore. I still really enjoyed them, and honestly, this was gonna be 4 stars until the very last line. Okay, I was listening in my bedroom after my run, and the last line happened, if you know, you know, and still, even though I knew it was coming, I was literally like, and like had tears, and I was just so excited, and it bumped it up to a 5 stars just because that very last line. I know, I'm trash for dystopian. I am 15 again. The next book I read was The Drift by C.J. Tudor. I read this as an ARC, but it did come out in January. So this is a snowy horror, and I have been wanting to read C.J. Tudor for a while, but this is the first book that I read by them. And this one is kind of difficult to explain. So we follow 3 different points of view, and this is kind of a dystopian horror because we know in this world there has been a virus, an outbreak, and it is like a decade old or something, and so something is going on. So the first character we follow is Hannah. Now Hannah, we know that she has been in a coach crash. She is in a giant bus with a bunch of other people, and they are leaving this place called the Academy to go to this place called the Retreat. Now we don't know anything about either places, we just know that they have been in a crash and they are trying to get out and survive. Now we also follow a character named Meg. Now Meg woke up in like one of those ski lift things. What are they called? Like not a gondola, what is it called? In one of those little ski car things. And she is with a bunch of other people, and they have just woken up because they were drugged. When they wake up, they find out that somebody among them is dead, and so they have to figure out who's the killer and why they are stranded in this little car and how they can also get to the retreat. The other person we follow is Carter. Now Carter actually works at this retreat. Once again, still don't really know what the whole retreat thing is, don't know what the academy is, but we are following these 3 characters as they are surviving in this world, and something mysterious is going on because you know that there's going to be a connection, but you don't know it until the very end. And I will say, the reveal wasn't super surprising to me, but it was really cool and fascinating how everything came together. But I did kind of lose interest at some points. There were some interesting points, but I felt like there was so much information that I wanted to know. I had so many questions and none of them were answered. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars, but it is one of those books that I cannot stop thinking about. And the next book I read, I am so proud of myself for reading this in January. I Conquered the Beast, and that is Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare. This is book 3 in the Artifices trilogy. This is the final book, so I finished this series. And if you know, the second book of this series, Lord of Shadows, is my least favorite Cassandra Clare book ever. Really don't like that book, and so I was not looking forward to this book. We follow the Blackthorns and Emma and Christina. There's a whole lot that goes into this world, and because this is the 3rd series that she has written within the world, There's just a whole lot to explain. Start from City of Bones, or go look up an order that suits you. But this one in particular, I love Emma and Julian so much. I love the Blackthorns, would die for them, and the way the second one ended, I was definitely interested to see how they would pick up the pieces and where it would go from there. But I will say, there is a relationship dynamic in this story that you might be able to tell from my words that I hate. Like, I want to rip those pages out. Oh my gosh, those parts are 1 star. And let me tell you, the first like 300 something pages, like this first part, 2 stars. And then the next 200 pages, 5 stars. When Emma and Julian go to a new place, if you know, you know, 5 stars. Love that part because it reminds me so much of like the original demon hunted, demon slaying like shadow hunters, and I love that vibe so much. My problem with this is that it is too much of the real world. There is too much politics, there is too much bigotry, and I get enough of that in my real life. And seeing that on the news and the world, I don't want to read it in the Shadowhunters. Like, I want you to kill a demon, okay? I don't want to know about your awful inquisitor consul person. Like, I don't care, because it just makes me angry, and I'm angry enough at the world. I don't need to be angry at the Shadowhunters as well. And that's my problem with this trilogy in particular, is that it focuses so much on those politics and how hatred is so rampant even in this world. But I just want to be out here killing demons, you know? And then the end of this was also like, we had a mix of 1 star in there, and then we had 4 star in there, and then we had 5 star in there. So as you could see, this is like a 900 page book, and my rating went like up and down, up and down, up and down. Overall, I settled on 4 stars. Nobody saw that coming. I really thought this was going to be even worse than Lord of Shadows, but because I love the Blackthorn so much, and I love how this one ended and how everything was wrapped up, it was just a really great way to surprise me, because I did not expect to like this one. So overall, 4 stars, but it is still my least favorite Cassandra Clare series. The next book I read was another reread for me through audiobook, and that is Allegiant by Veronica Roth. This is the 3rd book in the Divergent trilogy. Now, a lot of people are really angry at this book, and they hate something in particular that happened, but honestly, I'm not mad about it. Like, I'm kind of impressed that Veronica Roth would go there and that she would do the thing that she did. I will say, I wish other things had occurred, but I'm not mad at the thing that happened. This book was still fascinating, and Veronica Roth's intelligence really showed because of the way she described the dystopian world and how the genetics part played into it. But Tris and Ford in this one, once again, they definitely were good for each other's growth, but they just can't be endgame, because I don't think they were good for each other in the long run as they get older. But the way this one ended is still just so good, and it just really brought it home for me. But my enjoyment wasn't as much as the first 2. I will say the strongest, my favorite, is the first one, but I still give this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Rebel by Marie Lu. This is book 4 in the Legend series. Originally, Legend was a trilogy, but then a few years later in 2019, this book was published, and I just never got to it, so I reread the Legend trilogy last year, and I finally got to Rebel, and honestly, I wasn't super excited about it, because upon my reread of Legend, I just realized it's not as strong a dystopian series as others are. The first book I gave 4 stars, and then I think I went from 3 stars and then to 2 stars. So this one I just wasn't really excited about, but in this one in particular, it is set 10 years after the events of the original trilogy, and we follow Eden and Day. Now, Eden is Day's younger brother, and they're 10 years later. They are living in Ross City, Antarctica, which is like the most well-established place in the world. They're very high-tech, but Day is now working for like the intelligence agency, kind of like a police officer type thing, or like a CIA agent, FBI agent type of thing, and he is trying to hunt down this notorious gangster in Ross City, and somehow Eden gets involved. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of Edmund from the Chronicles of Narnia, but I was so surprised. I loved this one. This is my favorite book in the Legend world. Like, who would have thought? I love that we get to see Day as an older character in his 20s, because he is so much more intelligent and he understands what he's done and what he's been through. And we also get to see June and kind of see them come back together after 10 years. And it was so good also to see Eden as an older boy and try to make his own path, because he's been living in the shadow of his brother for so long. It was also really interesting to see the dystopia of Ross City because it is different from the dystopia of the Republic. I loved this one so much. I gave it 5 stars. Like, I'm not kidding. 5 stars. Loved it. And the last book I have to talk about, I finished on January 31st to mark 17 books, and that is Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. Of course, this was a reread for me times like a million. This is the sequel to The Hunger Games, and this has always been my favorite book in the series, and it remains that way. I once again tabbed it up, and I will be making a whole video for this one, just like I did for the first one. I love this one so much. We get to meet so many new characters and Finnick, and we get to see the background story of Haymitch, and it is so fascinating. Honestly, Suzanne Collins could write 73 other Hunger Games books about the previous 73 games, and I would just eat that up. Like, I would like do anything for that. So hardcore. I just love the series so much, and it is still so good. And the things Suzanne Collins did, like, this came out in 2009. This is revolutionary. Like, this is iconic, and it will forever be that way. Of course, once again, 5 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books that I read in the month of January. I also forgot to mention, I finished 3 series in January. My goal for the year is 10, and I've already finished 3. Now, one of those was a reread for me, so like, I've already still finished 2 series that were brand new to me. Amazing. I had such a great reading month. If you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave the snowflake emoji because I am wishing that I could get snow where I live, but alas, we don't. But that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, all my social media links will be down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!